To 10 incredible years, my husband Connor announced, raising his champagne flute at our anniversary party. Our guests cheered as he continued, and to new beginnings. The room fell silent when he pulled out a velvet box and got down on one knee, in front of Juliet, his marketing assistant. I stepped forward, smiling calmly. Funny you'd choose that ring, Connor. The custom 3-carat emerald cut with pavé diamonds. I turned to face our stunned guests. He ordered it from Wright & Taylor Jewelers 3 weeks ago. Perhaps he forgot that I became majority owner last year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I lifted my own glass. And those private emails planning your new life together? They're currently being projected onto every screen in this ballroom. The doors opened as Connor's face drained of color. My lawyer entered with divorce papers, and the SEC investigator followed with a warrant. 10 hours earlier, I had stood in front of my bedroom mirror, examining my reflection with critical precision. The emerald green dress, a deliberate choice, hugged my figure perfectly. My fingers moved methodically through the familiar ritual of fastening my grandmother's pearls around my neck. Tonight would be the culmination of 18 months of careful planning, of quiet observation, of meticulous documentation. "You look beautiful, Kate," my assistant Regina said from the doorway. "Are you certain you want to go through with this?" I met her eyes in the mirror. "More certain than I've been about anything." My voice carried a calm that surprised even me. The storm of emotions, betrayal, rage, heartbreak, had long since passed, leaving behind a crystalline clarity of purpose. Regina placed a folder on the bed. "Everything's ready. The AV team has confirmed the screens can be activated remotely. The security team knows to let Ms. Baxter and Agent Thompson in at precisely 8:45. She hesitated. "And Connor?" "Has no idea." I turned from the mirror. "His text confirmed he's bringing Juliet as his +1, since I told him I'd be arriving separately due to last-minute preparations." A small smile crossed my lips. "He thinks I'm still the same trustingly naive woman who built his jewelry empire while he took all the credit." The irony wasn't lost on me. Connor Taylor, the charming, ambitious man I'd married a decade ago, had systematically constructed my public image as the decorative, slightly dim wife with a knack for design, but no head for business. The woman who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of running a multi-million-dollar jewelry company, who was better suited to arranging flowers and hosting dinner parties than reading financial statements. What Connor had never bothered to discover was that before we met, I'd been 2 semesters away from completing my MBA, with a focus on luxury brand management. I'd set it aside, one of many sacrifices, to help him launch what would become Wright & Taylor Jewelers. While he built his reputation as the visionary behind the brand, I quietly shaped our design aesthetic, managed our craftspeople, and eventually handled our books. "The private dining room at Le Jardin has been prepared according to your specifications," Regina continued, consulting her tablet. 58 confirmed guests. Connor requested the champagne toast be moved up to 8:30 instead of after dinner. Of course he did. I picked up my clutch, checking its contents. A small thumb drive, my phone, and a folded document transferring my company shares to a trust I'd established months ago. He's always been impatient when he has an audience. Regina's expression softened with concern. "Kate, after tonight, are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" The question hung in the air between us. Was I ready for the public scandal? The dissolution of a marriage that had defined my adult life? The inevitable restructuring of the company I'd helped build from nothing? I closed my clutch with a decisive snap. What comes next is what should have happened years ago. I take back my life, my company, and my dignity. I moved toward the door, pausing briefly. And Connor learns what happens when you underestimate the woman whose name is literally on the building. The drive to Le Jardin offered a rare moment of solitude. Through the tinted windows of my car, I watched the city transform from the sleek financial district where our flagship store dominated a corner of Fifth Avenue to the exclusive enclave where we'd be celebrating a milestone that had become My mind drifted to the moment everything changed, 18 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I'd been reviewing quarterly sales reports in my home office when Connor's executive email accidentally synced to my tablet due to a system update our IT department had implemented. The notification that flashed across my screen was from Juliet Kaplan, his recently hired marketing director. Our future plans. Curiosity rather than suspicion had prompted me to open it. The first line shattered the carefully constructed reality I'd been living in. "I found the perfect place for us in Malibu, right on the beach like you wanted. Once the divorce is finalized and the company restructuring is complete, we can make the announcement official." What followed was evidence of not just an affair, but a meticulously planned coup. Connor intended to force me out of the company, using doctored financial records to claim I'd been embezzling funds. There were references to offshore accounts, manipulated inventory reports, and a timeline culminating in a public accusation scheduled for our 10-year anniversary party. I remembered sitting perfectly still, the tablet warm in my suddenly cold hands, rain pattering against the windows as my world imploded. Then, something unexpected happened. As the initial shock receded, it was replaced not by devastation, but by an icy, clarifying rage. That evening, when Connor returned home, I greeted him with the same warm smile I'd perfected over years of marriage. I poured his favorite whiskey, listened attentively to his stories about his challenging day, and began my own performance, one that would last for 18 months as I gathered evidence, secured allies, and prepared for tonight. "We've arrived." "Ms. Taylor!" My driver's voice pulled me from my thoughts as the car slowed to a stop in front of Le Jardin's elegant facade. Through the windows I could see guests arriving, air kisses being exchanged, champagne flutes already circulating on silver trays. Checked my watch, 7:30 p.m. In exactly 1 hour, Connor would make his toast. In 1 hour and 15 minutes, he would attempt to propose to his mistress at our anniversary party. And in 1 hour and 16 minutes, I would reveal that I'd known everything all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Andre Baxter, my attorney. "In position nearby. All documents ready." Another message followed, this one from Yasmin Thompson, the SEC investigator who'd been building a case against Connor for securities fraud after I'd provided initial evidence. "Warrant secured. Ready when you are." I took a deep breath and texted a single word to both. "Proceed." The maitre d' opened my door with a flourish. "Mrs. Taylor, welcome to Le Jardin. Your guests are eagerly awaiting your arrival." I stepped out, smoothing my emerald dress, the exact shade of the central stone in the ring Connor had secretly purchased for Juliet from our own company. A ring I had personally overseen the creation of, having intercepted his confidential order when our head designer sought my approval. "Thank you, Pierre." I smiled, projecting nothing but pleasant anticipation for the celebration ahead. "I believe this will be a night no one will forget." As I ascended the steps to the restaurant's entrance, I felt strangely weightless. For 10 years, I had gradually diminished myself to fit Connor's narrative. The decorative wife, the silent partner, the woman who couldn't possibly understand complex business transactions or recognize betrayal happening right in front of her. Tonight, that carefully crafted illusion would shatter, and from its fragments, I would emerge not as Connor Taylor's underestimated wife, but as Kate Wright, majority owner of Wright & Taylor Jewelers, and a woman who had been playing the long game all along. Few people knew that before becoming Mrs. Taylor. I was Catherine Donovan, summa cum laude graduate from Wharton with a focus on luxury brand management. I'd chosen Wright & Sons for my thesis project, a small jewelry store with exquisite craftsmanship but outdated business practices. The morning I walked in, portfolio case in hand, Connor was charming the wealthy woman at the counter. His gaze shifted to me, assessing, calculating, before his smile appeared. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Can I help you find something in your price range? His tone suggested nothing in the store was. Actually, I'm here to speak with Mr. Wright about my graduate thesis. His expression changed instantly. Connor Taylor, General Manager, Mr. Wright, is semi-retired. He extended his hand, suddenly interested. A business student? Surprising. Our dynamic was established in that first exchange. His assumption that my appearance contradicted my capabilities. I should have recognized the warning sign. Over coffee that became dinner that became weekends together, Connor shared his ambitions to transform the old jewelry shop. I shared my research on emerging luxury markets and design aesthetics that balance tradition with modernity. Our conversation sparked with possibility, my strategic vision complementing his industry connections. We'd make an incredible team, he'd said 3 months in, squeezing my hand across the table. Wright wants to retire, but his son has no interest in the business, he confided later. I've been saving, but it'll take years to make an offer. When I suggested combining my thesis with a full business plan for acquisition, his eyes lit with recognition. Not of my value as a partner, I now realize, but of my utility as a tool. The proposal came 6 months after we met. Sunset in Central Park, Connor on one knee offering a sapphire ring he claimed to have designed himself. I discovered years later that our lead craftsman had created it under Connor's vague direction. I can't afford to buy Wright out yet, he admitted in bed that night. But together, with your business background and my jewelry expertise, we could approach investors. Within a year, we'd assembled the capital, my grandmother's inheritance forming the cornerstone, Connor's industry connections providing the rest. Wright & Taylor Jewelers launched with glowing press about jewelry prodigy Connor Taylor's bold vision. Standing beside him at the grand opening, I waited for acknowledgement that never came. When investors praised his genius, he accepted with practiced humility. When design magazines requested interviews with the creative force behind the brand, he stepped forward alone. People need to believe in a singular vision, he explained when I questioned him. It's just marketing, Kate. When we're established, there'll be time for dual credit. I convinced myself it was strategic, that my contributions, the business structure, the distinctive design aesthetic, the innovative retail approach, would eventually be recognized. I wasn't seeking fame, just acknowledgement of our partnership. Years passed. Wright & Taylor expanded to Chicago, then Los Angeles. We launched our signature collection, featuring designs I'd sketched during late nights, that Connor presented as his own. Fashion editors praised Taylor's intuitive understanding of modern femininity. Industry experts analyzed Taylor's business acumen in transforming a neighborhood jeweler into a national luxury brand. Meanwhile, I managed operations, developed collections, and maintained relationships with our craftspeople. When jewelry trade publications wrote about Connor Taylor's meteoric rise, I rationalized my erasure as necessary for brand cohesion. At dinner parties, Connor would laugh. Kate's got a good eye for color, but she leaves the business to me. Our guests would smile indulgently while I poured more wine, my MBA and the company's financial statements that bore my handwriting apparently invisible. By our 5th anniversary, the pattern was firmly established. Connor, the visionary, the face, the brand. Kate, the supportive wife with a cute hobby designing jewelry. When I finally completed my MBA, attending night classes while working full-time at our company, Connor toasted mockingly, to Kate, finally finishing school. Now she can help with the accounting. Our friends laughed. I smiled tightly, knowing my thesis on luxury market expansion had already increased our revenue by 40%. Even as I diminished in our public narrative, my legal position strengthened. Connor, dismissive of tedious details, increasingly signed documents without reading them. When our lawyers recommended restructuring company ownership for tax purposes, he waved away the paperwork with a distracted, "Whatever makes sense, just summarize it for me." I did summarize, omitting that the restructuring gradually shifted majority ownership to me, that my name appeared on patents he believed were his alone, that the corporate bylaws now required board approval for major financial decisions. Kate Wright, who stood at our company's flagship store counter 7 years into our marriage, was no longer the eager graduate student dazzled by Connor's charm. I'd learned to document everything: conversations, decisions, designs, maintaining meticulous records in a parallel email account he knew nothing about. I'd connected with old classmates who'd become corporate attorneys and financial analysts, maintaining these relationships under the guise of girls' lunches that Connor found amusingly frivolous. When the design director needed approval for special projects, she came to me first, knowing I made the real decisions. When our craftspeople had concerns, they sought me out, recognizing who truly valued their work. Perhaps I would have continued indefinitely in this shadow role, building the company while Connor took the credit, if not for that rainy Tuesday when his executive emails mistakenly synced to my tablet. The message from Juliet Kaplan appeared with preview text visible. "Found the perfect Malibu property for us once divorce is finalized." What followed wasn't just evidence of an affair, but of systematic betrayal. Connor and Juliet planning my removal from the company through false accusations of financial impropriety, scheduled to culminate at our 10th anniversary celebration. That evening, as Connor described his exhausting day of meetings, I poured his favorite whiskey and listened attentively, my expression betraying nothing of what I'd discovered. The performance I'd perfected as the supportive, slightly dim wife would serve me for 18 more months, long enough to set the stage for tonight. Connor Taylor entered Le Jardin 15 minutes after I arrived, commanding attention the moment he stepped through the door. Designer suit impeccably tailored, silver cufflinks catching the light, hair artfully tousled in that deliberate way that suggested effortless perfection. And beside him, her hand resting in the crook of his elbow, walked Juliet Kaplan. Where Connor exuded practiced charisma, Juliet projected calculated ambition. Her sleek black dress clung to her figure, sophisticated yet provocative. Diamond drop earrings, Wright and Taylor's signature pieces I'd designed for last year's winter collection, glinted at her ears. The irony wasn't lost on me. "There he is," called Ansel Whitman, Connor's longtime friend and our company's marketing director. "The man of the hour." Connor raised his hand in acknowledgement, his smile revealing perfect teeth that had cost us nearly $20,000 in cosmetic dentistry 3 years ago. "Just fashionably late," he called back, guiding Juliet through the crowd with proprietary confidence. I watched from my position near the bar as they made their entrance, observing how other guests shifted to accommodate Connor's presence. Our oldest craftsman, Andre Petrova, 73 and still the finest diamond setter in the business, stepped deferentially aside. Wealthy clients leaned in eagerly as Connor passed. Junior staff members straightened their postures, hopeful for acknowledgement. This was the empire Connor had built, or rather, the empire he'd claimed. A social hierarchy with himself at the center, everyone else orbiting at various distances according to their perceived value. Including me. "Kate!" Connor's voice carried across the room as he spotted me. He angled toward the bar, Juliet still attached to his arm. "There's my beautiful wife, handling all the last-minute details as usual." The casual dismissal, suggesting I'd been absent because I was managing party logistics rather than executing the final steps of an 18-month strategy, was so characteristic I almost laughed. "Everything's under control," I replied, accepting his perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "Hello, Juliet. Lovely earrings." Her hand moved self-consciously to touch one. "Thank you. They were a gift from—" She stopped abruptly, glancing at Connor. From the marketing department, he finished smoothly. Year-end bonus for exceptional performance. What Connor couldn't know, was that I had personally signed off on those earrings, having noted the purchase order in our inventory system. The invoice had designated them as executive gifts and had been billed to Connor's personal account, not the marketing budget. Exceptional indeed, I murmured, taking a deliberate sip of my champagne. Connor's eyes narrowed slightly, the almost imperceptible tension in his jawline that signaled irritation. After 10 years of marriage, I could read his micro-expressions like a familiar text. "Darling, I need to make some rounds," he said, already turning away. "Juliet's been working with the Bennington account. They're considering a major purchase for their anniversary collection. I promised she could meet them personally tonight." "Of course." I smiled pleasantly. "Don't let me keep you." As they moved away, I observed their body language, the slight pressure of his hand at the small of her back, the way she leaned fractionally toward him when she laughed. To most people in the room, they appeared as nothing more than a successful executive and his talented protégé. But I recognized the intimate choreography of two people accustomed to touching each other. I'd first noticed Connor's interest in Juliet shortly after he hired her 2 years ago. She'd arrived with impressive credentials, MBA from Columbia, previous experience at a top-tier cosmetics brand, references that practically glowed. What the resume didn't mention was her exceptional ability to mirror Connor's worst traits, his self-absorption disguised as vision, his willingness to claim others' work, his talent for managing up while disregarding those beneath him. Within 6 months, she'd been promoted twice. Within a year, Connor had created a special position for her, Director of Brand Evolution. The title was meaningless, but it placed her directly under his supervision and required frequent travel. Paris, for market research. Tokyo, for trend analysis. Always at luxury hotels with adjoining rooms. I watched as Connor guided Juliet toward the Benningtons, a wealthy couple who had been loyal clients since our first store opened. Mrs. Bennington embraced Connor warmly, while Mr. Bennington shook his hand with clear admiration. I could read Connor's practiced script from across the room, the modest smile, the gracious acknowledgement of their support, the carefully calibrated flattery. Then the introduction of Juliet, the slight step back that centered her in the conversation, the subtle hand gesture that indicated she should speak. I'd seen this performance dozens of times at industry events. Connor elevating someone just enough to make them feel valued, while ensuring they understood their position remained at his discretion. What made Juliet different was that she believed herself to be Connor's equal partner, rather than another useful tool. The emails I'd discovered revealed not just an affair, but a shared vision. Connor would divorce the wife who never understood the business, marry the dynamic marketing genius who complemented his vision, and together they would take Right and Taylor global. The plan included forcing me out through manufactured evidence of financial misconduct, using board connections Connor believed were loyal to him alone. The timing was specific. Accusations at the anniversary celebration, immediate suspension from operations, a press narrative that positioned Connor as the betrayed creative genius and me as the jealous wife who'd tried to sabotage his success. What Connor failed to recognize was that the board members he believed loyal to him maintained that loyalty primarily because of relationships I had cultivated. The legal framework he assumed protected him had been systematically adjusted through documentation I had overseen. The creative vision he claimed as his own was preserved in design notebooks bearing my handwriting and dates that preceded his inspirations. Across the room, Connor threw his head back in laughter at something Mr. Bennington said. Juliet touched Connor's arm, leaning in to add something that made the older couple smile appreciatively. They looked perfect together, the charismatic jewelry magnate and his stylish protégé, representing the sophisticated aesthetic of Wright and Taylor. I felt Regina's presence before she spoke, moving quietly to stand beside me at the bar. Everything is in place, she murmured, accepting a glass of sparkling water from the bartender. Andre just texted. He's in position with the papers. Agent Thompson confirmed the warrant has been authorized and her team is on standby. I nodded almost imperceptibly, maintaining my pleasant expression as I watched Connor work the room. He hadn't glanced back in my direction once since our brief interaction. In his mind, I had been dealt with, acknowledged, dismissed, and forgotten. The AV system? I asked quietly. Ready on your signal. One tap on your phone will activate the presentation. The weight of the moment settled around me. 18 months of planning, of documenting, of careful preparation leading to this precise evening. In approximately 45 minutes, Connor would raise his glass for the anniversary toast that would, instead, become a proposal to his mistress. And I would finally reveal the strategic mind he had always underestimated. Good, I said softly. Then we wait. The first sign that something was amiss in my marriage came during our second year together. We had been working 16-hour days to prepare for our first major industry showcase, the International Jewelry Exhibition in Basel. The collection I had designed, geometric pieces inspired by Art Deco architecture, had generated unprecedented pre-orders. The night before our departure, I found Connor in his study, practicing his presentation. When did you first conceive this design aesthetic? Asked an imaginary interviewer as Connor rehearsed in front of a mirror. I've always been fascinated by the clean lines of modernist architecture, he replied smoothly. The juxtaposition of geometric precision with the organic beauty of precious stones creates a tension that defines the Wright and Taylor philosophy. I stood in the doorway, a strange hollowness forming in my chest. Those were my words, almost verbatim from the design brief I had written 3 months earlier. That's my design concept, I said quietly. Connor turned, momentarily startled before his expression settled into affectionate condescension. Well, yes, you helped with the initial sketches, but the vision, the overall direction, that's what they're asking about. The vision came from my graduate research on reinterpreting historical design movements for contemporary markets, I countered, trying to keep my voice level. You were focused on traditional settings until I showed you the architecture-inspired prototypes. Something flickered across Connor's face, irritation quickly masked by reasonableness. He crossed the room and placed his hands on my shoulders. Katie, he said, using the diminutive I had repeatedly asked him not to use. This is business. The Connor Taylor brand is what's selling these pieces. Do you think buyers care about the academic theory behind the designs? They want a story, a visionary, not a committee. I'm not asking for public credit, I insisted. But in private, between us, you could acknowledge my contribution. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that felt more dismissive than affectionate. Of course I acknowledge it. I couldn't do this without you. You're the silent strength behind everything. He smiled his magazine cover smile. Now let's get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. That night, I lay awake beside him, turning the conversation over in my mind. It wasn't just that Connor had claimed my design concept. It was the ease with which he'd done it. As if the line between his work and mine didn't exist. As if my contributions naturally belonged to him once they proved valuable. The Basel exhibition proved even more revealing. I watched from the periphery as Connor charmed journalists and buyers, describing his creative process and design philosophy, using descriptions of my work patterns, my inspirations, my methodologies. Mr. Taylor, these architectural elements are revolutionary in fine jewelry. What sparked this approach? Asked a reporter from a leading trade publication. I spent a summer in Chicago after college, Connor replied without hesitation. The geometry of the buildings against the lake, that tension between the angular and the fluid, it stayed with me. I had been the one who spent a summer in Chicago researching architectural preservation. Connor had never even visited the city before our store opening there. Later that evening, at the exhibition gala dinner, I found myself seated beside Yasmin. Ravel, a respected jewelry appraiser known for her encyclopedic knowledge of the industry. "Your husband is quite the showman," she observed dryly, watching Connor hold court at the center of the room. "He knows how to work a crowd," I acknowledged. She studied me over her wineglass. "Interesting that he's presenting designs that bear such a striking resemblance to your graduate portfolio, the one you presented at the Emerging Designers Showcase 3 years ago." My head snapped up. "You saw that?" "I make it a point to track promising talent," she replied. "Your structural approach to settings was distinctive. I recognized it immediately in this collection, though the attribution seems to have shifted." Heat crept up my neck. "The Wright & Taylor brand is built around Connor's identity," I said carefully. "It's a marketing strategy." "A strategy that appears to be working," she conceded. "But be careful, Mrs. Taylor. I've watched many talented designers disappear into their husbands' shadows. Sometimes they never reemerge." Her warning stayed with me, a quiet alarm bell that I chose to silence with rationalizations. We were building something together. The company bore my name alongside. Wrights. If Connor took more credit than he deserved in public, that was simply business pragmatism. Yet the pattern continued, expanding beyond design to encompass all aspects of our business. When I developed our signature packaging, distinctive emerald boxes with geometric gold detailing, Connor presented it to our board as his brainchild. When I negotiated favorable terms with our primary diamond supplier, Connor announced the achievement as his own. The most telling incident came during our 4th year of marriage. I had spent months cultivating a relationship with the Moretti family, Italian gemstone suppliers known for their exceptional emeralds. The Morettis were traditional, patriarchal, and initially resistant to working with Wright & Taylor, which they considered too modern, too American. I learned Italian, researched their family history, and carefully built a rapport with Sophia Moretti, the elderly matriarch who held more influence than her sons acknowledged. Through patient diplomacy, I eventually secured an exclusive arrangement for their finest stones, a coup that would distinguish our high-end pieces from competitors. When the Morettis visited New York to finalize the agreement, Connor insisted on hosting the dinner himself. "The Italians expect to deal with the man in charge," he explained. "It's their culture. You understand?" I did understand. Far better than Connor, which was why I had focused my efforts on Sophia rather than her sons. But I acquiesced, preparing Connor with detailed notes about the family's preferences and history. At dinner, I watched him work his charm, claiming knowledge of Italian wine regions he had never visited, discussing gemstone assessment techniques I had taught him the night before. The Moretti men responded warmly, clearly comfortable in this masculine exchange of self-importance. Then Sophia, who had been quietly observing, turned to me and said in Italian, "Your husband presents himself well, but I made this arrangement with you, Catherine. I assume you will continue to be our primary contact?" Before I could respond, Connor laughed and said in English, "My wife's Italian is fairly basic, Mrs. Moretti. She can order in restaurants, but business discussions are beyond her vocabulary." Sophia's eyes never left mine as I replied in flawless Italian, "I would be honored to continue our relationship, Sophia. Perhaps we might visit your gardens in Tuscany this spring, as we discussed." A moment of silence fell over the table. Connor's smile remained fixed, but I felt his foot press warningly against mine under the table. Later that night, the argument was inevitable. "You undermined me," Connor hissed once we were alone. "Made me look foolish in front of important suppliers." "You lied about my capabilities," I countered. "Those relationships are mine. I built them. Everything you build for us, for this company," he snapped. "Your ego is getting in the way of our success." My ego. The irony was staggering. That night marked a shift in my understanding of our marriage. I began to see the pattern with painful clarity. I created value that Connor claimed. I built relationships that Connor leveraged. I developed innovations that Connor presented as his vision. And each time I objected, I was being difficult, oversensitive, undermining our success. Each time I insisted on recognition, I was told that our accomplishments transcended individual credit. Each time I stood my ground, I was making things unnecessarily complicated. Little did Connor know that I was beginning to keep records, emails, design notes, meeting minutes. Not with any plan in mind, but with a growing sense that someday I might need to prove what I had built. The rainy Tuesday that changed everything began ordinarily enough. Connor had left early for a breakfast meeting with investors, kissing my cheek distractedly on his way out the door. I spent the morning in my home office reviewing quarterly sales figures, preparing for the upcoming board meeting where, as usual, Connor would present my analysis as his own. Outside, rain lashed against the windows of our Upper East Side townhouse. The elegant space featured an architectural digest as Connor Taylor's sophisticated Manhattan retreat. The interviewer had asked minimal questions about my input on the design, despite the fact that I'd worked directly with the architect for months, while Connor attended only 2 planning meetings. My tablet chimed with a notification, a system. Update for our company email accounts had completed. Our IT director had implemented enhanced security protocols after a competitor experienced a data breach. I tapped to acknowledge the notification, and that's when I saw it. Connor's executive email account had been synchronized to my device. A simple technical error, our similar usernames had likely confused the system. I was about to contact IT to fix the issue when a new message appeared in Connor's inbox. The sender, Juliet Kaplan. The subject line, Our future plans. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. Connor and I had never established firm boundaries about privacy. Our work and personal lives were too intertwined. He regularly used my laptop, checked messages on my phone. This could easily be business-related, I reasoned, as Juliet was ostensibly working on our 5-year strategic plan. The first line shattered that rationalization. I've found the perfect place for us in Malibu, right on the beach like you wanted. Once the divorce is finalized and the company restructuring is complete, we can make the announcement official. My fingers hovered over the screen, suddenly numb. Divorce? Company restructuring? I scrolled down, a strange detachment settling over me as I read further. The real estate agent says we can close quickly once you've liquidated those assets we discussed. I can't wait to start our life together without her constant presence. Speaking of which, have you talked to the board members about the evidence? Will they support removing her after the anniversary announcement? I sat perfectly still, the only sound in the room, the steady drumming of rain against glass. With methodical precision, I opened the attached document. WNT Restructuring Plan.pdf. Inside was a detailed timeline for the dissolution of my marriage and my removal from the company I had built. May 15th, secure board allies, Whitman, Peterson, Landry confirmed. June 8th, finalized documentation of financial discrepancies for presentation. July 20th, announced separation privately to key personnel. August 17th, public announcement at 10th anniversary. Celebration August 18th. Board vote to remove KT from operations pending investigation. September. Press release on unfortunate situation and CT's commitment to company future. October. Finalized divorce settlement with minimal company equity. 2 KT. November. Announced JK as new creative director. December. CT-JK engagement announcement. The methodical timeline, with its clinical abbreviations of our names, felt surreal, like reading a business plan for the systematic erasure of my existence. But the financial section of the document jolted me from shock to focused anger. Connor and Juliet had fabricated evidence suggesting I had diverted company funds for personal use, creating a paper trail of fraudulent transactions that could potentially lead to criminal charges. With shaking hands, I forwarded the entire email, chained to my personal account, then took screenshots of everything, including metadata showing dates and times. Only then did I allow myself to feel the full impact of what I'd discovered. My husband of nearly a decade was not just having an affair. He was conspiring to destroy me professionally and personally. The man who had built his career on my ideas was planning to excise me from the narrative entirely, potentially leaving me financially ruined and professionally discredited. I moved to the kitchen on autopilot, filling the kettle for tea I knew I wouldn't drink. Through the window, I could see rain transforming the carefully manicured garden into something wild and uncontrolled. A parallel transformation was occurring within me, the compliant, accommodating Kate giving way to something harder, more resolute. The kettle whistled, its high-pitched scream matching the white noise in my head. As I poured water over a tea bag, watching the color bleed outward, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock was receding, replaced by crystalline clarity. I needed to protect myself. But more than that, I needed justice. For the next 2 hours, I systematically examined Connor's email account, downloading and documenting everything relevant. There were dozens of exchanges between him and Juliet, dating back more than a year, plans for their future together, strategies for undermining me, discussions of how they would restructure the company once I was gone. Most damning were there explicit conversations about manufacturing evidence against me. Connor had instructed Juliet to create false financial records showing irregular transfers from company accounts to offshore entities supposedly controlled by me. They had even produced doctored emails purporting to be from me, discussing these non-existent accounts. The beauty of it, Connor had written, is that she's so uninvolved with the financial operations that she won't even understand what she's being accused of until it's too late. The irony was almost painful. While Connor believed I was uninvolved with finances, I had been personally reviewing every quarterly statement, monitoring cash flow, and overseeing tax planning for years. He had simply never bothered to notice, finding financial details tedious and beneath his creative vision. At 3:42 p.m., I heard Connor's key in the front door. I closed the tablet, erased my browsing history, and took a deep breath. When he entered the kitchen, I was calmly preparing coffee, his preferred afternoon ritual. "You're home early," I observed, my voice remarkably steady. "Meetings finished. Sooner than expected." He loosened his tie, dropping his briefcase on the counter. Landry was being difficult about the Tokyo expansion again. I nodded sympathetically, passing him the cup of coffee prepared exactly as he liked it. "You look tired. Stressful day?" "Nothing I can't handle." He took a sip, sighing appreciatively. "What about you? Anything interesting happened today?" I met his gaze directly, searching for some sign of the betrayal mapped out in such careful detail. On my tablet. His eyes revealed nothing but the usual distracted affection he offered when his mind was elsewhere. "Nothing worth mentioning," I replied with a small smile. "Just reviewing some numbers for the board presentation." That evening, as we moved through our usual routine, dinner, Connor's animated descriptions of his challenging day, my attentive nodding, I began the most convincing performance of my life. On the surface, I remained Kate Taylor, supportive wife and silent partner. But beneath that carefully maintained facade, I was already strategizing, already planning. Connor Taylor had severely underestimated me for the last time. He believed me incapable of understanding the financial maneuvers he'd planned against me. He thought me too trusting to investigate, too naive to protect myself, too dependent to fight back. As I watched him across the dinner table, laughing about some comment Ansel had made during their meeting, I made a silent promise to myself. When this was over, Connor would finally recognize the full extent of my capabilities. Right. Before they destroyed him, sleep eluded me that night. I lay beside Connor, listening to his rhythmic breathing, watching moonlight trace patterns across our bedroom ceiling. The man sleeping peacefully next to me, the man I had built a life and company with, had meticulously planned my professional execution and personal humiliation. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it defied immediate response. At 3:17 a.m., I slipped from our bed and moved silently to my home office. In the blue glow of my computer screen, I began to assess my situation with the analytical precision Connor had always underestimated. First, I needed to understand my legal position. I opened the company's operating agreement, the document Connor had dismissively signed years ago after a cursory glance. As I suspected, my gradual acquisition of company shares had gone completely unnoticed by him. On paper, I controlled 52% of Wright & Taylor Jewelers, a fact Connor had apparently failed to discover during his planning. Next, I reviewed our prenuptial agreement. Connor had insisted upon it, concerned about protecting the business empire he intended to build. The document heavily favored him in case of divorce, limiting my claim to assets acquired during the marriage. However, it contained a critical infidelity clause that Connor himself had requested. Proven adultery would invalidate the financial limitations. By dawn, I had compiled a preliminary inventory of my resources and vulnerabilities. The clarity was bracing, but it didn't address the hollow ache spreading beneath my ribs. This wasn't just business. This was a decade of my life, of shared dreams and ambitions revealed as illusory. I showered and dressed before Connor woke, needing to present a composed facade when he emerged. When he finally appeared in our kitchen, I handed him coffee with the same smile I'd offered thousands of mornings before. "Early start?" he asked, accepting the cup with casual entitlement. "Board report preparations," I replied. The Tokyo numbers needed reorganizing. He nodded absently, his attention already on his phone. "I'll be late tonight. Dinner with the Kenton Group about potential investment." The lie slid off his tongue effortlessly. According to his emails with Juliet, they had reservations at Liao. Bernardin followed by theater tickets, a strategy session billed to the company. "No problem," I said lightly. "I have plenty to keep me busy." After Connor left, a strange stillness settled over the house. I wandered from room to room, seeing our shared spaces with new eyes. The photographs of us at industry events, art we'd chosen together, mementos from trips where, I now realized, Connor had likely been communicating with Juliet behind my back. In Phi. Our home office, I paused before the wall of press features. Connor on the cover of Business Insider, Connor profiled in Luxury Quarterly, Connor accepting the Industry Innovation Award. My contributions to each achievement rendered invisible. My presence reduced to Connor Taylor's wife in photo captions, if acknowledged at all. Anger rose in my throat, sudden and clarifying. Not the hot, impulsive anger that leads to rash decisions, but something colder and more focused. A determination that cut through confusion and heartbreak with surgical precision. I would not allow Connor to erase me. Not from our company. Not from our shared achievements. Not from the narrative of Wright & Taylor's success. I opened my laptop and scheduled a meeting with Andre Baxter, a corporate attorney I'd met through a women's business mentorship program I'd quietly participated in without Connor's knowledge. His specialty was protecting intellectual property and minority shareholders, exactly what I needed if my controlling interests somehow failed me. Next, I contacted Yasmin Thompson, now a senior investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We'd maintained a professional relationship since that early encounter at the Basel exhibition, occasionally meeting for coffee when she was in New York. Connor had always dismissed these meetings as networking that leads nowhere, never recognizing Yasmin's substantial influence in regulatory circles. My message to her was careful, referencing potential irregularities in financial reporting, I'd discovered at Wright and Taylor that warranted a confidential discussion. No accusations, no emotional language, just enough to secure a meeting. By noon, both appointments were confirmed for the following week. I created a new email account under a pseudonym for all communications related to my emerging strategy, understanding that Connor might have access to my regular accounts. That evening, alone in our home while Connor wined and dined Juliet, I made a crucial decision. I would not confront him immediately. Emotional confrontation would only warn him, allowing him to accelerate his plans or destroy evidence. Instead, I would do what I had always done best: work methodically, gather information, build my case, and plan for the moment of maximum impact. If Connor wanted to turn our anniversary celebration into the scene of my professional execution, I would instead make it the stage for his reckoning. The symmetry seemed appropriate. I pulled out a notebook, not digital, nothing that could be traced or hacked, and began mapping my strategy. I would need comprehensive documentation of Connor's financial misdeeds, which, based on his emails, with Juliet, were substantial. I would need allies within the company and industry. I would need unassailable evidence of his affair and their conspiracy. Most importantly, I would need absolute control of my emotions. For this to work, I had to maintain the perfect facade of the trusting, slightly oblivious wife that Connor expected. Any change in my behavior would trigger his suspicion. When Connor returned home shortly after midnight, smelling faintly of expensive perfume that wasn't mine, I was waiting in bed with a book, the picture of oblivious domesticity. "Good meeting?" I asked, setting my book aside. "Productive," he replied, loosening his tie. "The Kenton Group is interested in the Asian expansion. Could be a major capital infusion." I nodded appreciatively, marveling at the ease of his deception. "That's wonderful news. You always know how to close these deals." His smile was warm with self-satisfaction as he headed for the shower. He believed himself clever, triumphant, the master strategist orchestrating events to his advantage. He had no idea that in that moment, watching him disappear into our bathroom, I had made the decision that would ultimately destroy the illusion he had so carefully constructed. I would continue playing the role he had assigned me, the supportive, unquestioning wife with no head for business. I would appear to notice nothing, suspect nothing, understand nothing. Meanwhile, I would be documenting everything, building a case so compelling that when it was finally presented, there would be no recovery possible. The performance would require precision, patience, and emotional control. For the next 18 months, I would live a double life, outwardly unchanged while methodically preparing for the moment when Connor Taylor would finally understand exactly who he had underestimated. As I heard the shower running, I allowed myself one moment of raw emotion, a single tear tracking down my cheek. I mourned briefly for the partnership I had believed in, for the years invested in a man who had seen me as nothing more than a stepping stone to his ambitions. Then I wiped away the tear, straightened my shoulders, and opened my book again. When Connor emerged from the bathroom, he found me reading peacefully, offering him a distracted smile as he joined me in bed. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing something, perhaps a lingering tension, in my expression. "Everything's fine," I assured him, reaching over to turn out the light. "Just tired. Big day tomorrow." He had no idea how big. No idea that this was the day Catherine Wright began dismantling Connor Taylor's carefully constructed world. "I need complete access to all financial records for the past 5 years," I explained to Regina Montgomery during our first private meeting. "Every transaction, every authorization, every international wire transfer." We sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe 15 blocks from the Wright and Taylor offices, far from Connor's usual haunts. Regina had been with the company for 6 years as our chief financial administrator, brilliant, meticulous, and consistently undervalued by Connor, who treated her like a glorified bookkeeper rather than the CPA with a master's degree from Wharton that she actually was. That's extensive, Regina replied, stirring her tea thoughtfully. May I ask why? I hesitated, calculating how much to reveal. Regina was essential to my plan, but trust required vulnerability I wasn't yet ready to offer. Let's just say I've noticed some inconsistencies that concern me, I said carefully. As majority shareholder, I have a responsibility to ensure everything is in order. Regina's eyebrows lifted slightly at majority shareholder, but she didn't comment on it directly. Connor doesn't typically involve himself with financial reviews, she observed. He's authorized various transfers and expenditures, but the detailed oversight has always been my domain, and yours occasionally. I nodded, acknowledging the subtle question beneath her statement. Connor believes I'm preparing a comprehensive report for potential international investors. He's encouraged me to be thorough. The lie slid easily from my lips. I'd told Connor I was working on a design retrospective, knowing he'd pay little attention to a project he considered beneath his creative genius. Regina studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached for her tablet, opened a secure browser, and entered a complex password. I've maintained separate records of certain transactions that seemed irregular, she said, turning the screen toward me, particularly those involving Corsican Holdings and Emergen Consultants. My breath caught as I scanned the spreadsheet. These were companies I'd never heard of, yet the records showed millions flowing through them from Wright and Taylor accounts. Who authorized these payments? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Connor did, with Juliet Kaplan as the secondary signatory. When I questioned the purpose, I was told they were strategic investments, and that detailed documentation would follow. Regina's tone remained professional, but her disapproval was evident. The documentation never materialized. How long has this been happening? The first transfer to Corsican Holdings occurred 14 months ago. The payments to Emergen began approximately 8 months ago, shortly after Juliet was promoted to Director of Brand Evolution. The timeline aligned perfectly with Connor and Juliet's affair. I scrolled through the records, noting the increasing frequency and amounts of transfers. Why are you showing me this? I asked quietly. Why not take it to Connor directly, or to the board? Regina closed the tablet, her movements deliberate. Because unlike some people, I recognize who actually built this company. She met my gaze directly. And because I've spent 6 years watching you create value while Connor claims credit. These irregular transactions began after you secured the Moretti exclusivity agreement, the deal that doubled our market valuation. I absorbed this, recognizing both the ally and the information she was offering. Regina hadn't just been tracking suspicious finances. She'd been observing the power dynamics within our company with clear-eyed precision. What would you need to compile a complete forensic accounting record? I asked. Decision made. 2 weeks. Unrestricted system access, and absolute confidentiality. Her response was immediate, as if she'd been waiting for this question. I've already secured backups of all financial data, just as a standard precaution. Standard precaution, I repeated with a small smile, recognizing the careful groundwork Regina had laid without direction. I'd like that analysis as soon as possible. Focus particularly on any patterns connecting these shell companies to personal expenses. By the following week, I'd established a secure foundation for my investigation. Regina's forensic accounting revealed systematic financial misconduct. Connor had been funneling company funds through shell corporations into personal accounts for over a year. The amounts were significant but carefully calculated to remain below thresholds that would trigger automatic reviews. My meeting with Andre Baxter proved equally productive. The corporate attorney listened impassively as I outlined my situation, occasionally jotting notes but offering no commentary until I finished. To be clear, he said finally, you have documented evidence of your husband's affair, conspiracy to remove you from the company you co-founded, and potentially criminal. Financial misconduct? Yes. And your goal is not merely divorce proceedings, but to maintain control of the company and potentially pursue criminal charges? Correct. Andre leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Mrs. Taylor, with the evidence you've described, we could file for divorce immediately, freezing assets and initiating proceedings that would likely be quite favorable to you. That's not enough, I replied firmly. Filing now would give Connor time to destroy evidence, manipulate the board, and potentially salvage his reputation. I want this handled comprehensively and conclusively. A hint of respect flickered in Andre's eyes. Then we need to be strategic. I recommend creating a documentation timeline, securing witness statements from key personnel, and establishing an irrefutable paper trail for both the financial misconduct and the conspiracy to frame you. How long? To build an airtight case? 3 to 4 months minimum. But if your husband is planning to make his move at your anniversary celebration, we need to be ready before then. We will be, I assured him, already mentally cataloging the resources at my disposal. The meeting with Yasmin Thompson from the SEC proved most challenging to arrange without raising suspicion. Connor monitored my public calendar, though he rarely bothered to check what I actually did during the day. To create cover, I scheduled a fictitious meeting with a potential supplier at the same time, then met Yasmin at a private room in the New York Public Library. These transactions follow a classic pattern of corporate self-dealing, Yasmin noted, reviewing the documentation I'd provided. The structured nature of the transfers suggests deliberate intent to conceal. Is it enough to warrant investigation? I asked. Based on what you've shared, absolutely. But Kate, she hesitated, setting aside her professional demeanor for a moment. An SEC investigation would become public. It would impact the company's stock, potentially harm innocent employees. Are you prepared for those consequences? The question gave me pause. Wright and Taylor employed over 200 people, many of whom had been with us since the beginning. They weren't responsible for Connor's actions or my situation. What if the investigation could be timed to coordinate with other actions? I asked carefully. If evidence were presented to the board simultaneously with regulatory intervention? Yasmin considered this. It would require precise coordination, but it could potentially minimize collateral damage. She made a note in her file. I'll need more than these summary documents to proceed officially. Bank records, authorization signatures, board minutes showing who approved what and when. You'll have everything within 30 days, I promised. As I gathered resources and allies, I maintained absolute normalcy in my interactions with Connor. I laughed at his jokes, listened to his stories, and feigned excitement about the anniversary celebration he was planning. I worked regular hours at the office, contributed to meetings as expected, and gave no indication that anything had changed. The duplicity was exhausting, but necessary. Each morning, I woke beside the man who was plotting my downfall and smiled at him over breakfast. Each evening, I listened patiently as he described business developments that I often knew more about than he did. The anniversary party planning is coming along nicely, Connor mentioned casually one evening, swirling his scotch. I've arranged something special for the toast. I looked up from my book with practiced interest. Oh, what kind of special? You'll see, he replied with a secretive smile. Let's just say it will be a night to remember. I'm sure it will, I agreed, maintaining my expression of pleasant curiosity while my mind calculated timelines and contingencies. Connor had no idea that while he planned my public humiliation, I was methodically assembling the resources that would ensure his. To execute this properly, we need to approach it like a military operation, Andre advised during our third meeting, spreading documents across the conference table in his firm's secure room. Precise timing, coordinated movements, and contingency plans for every scenario. The room, deliberately located in an innocuous building in Midtown rather than Andre's prestigious downtown office, had been swept for recording devices before our arrival. The level of caution might have seemed excessive 4 months ago. Now it felt entirely necessary. "I've identified 4 key areas we need to address," I said, opening my own portfolio. "Financial evidence, corporate governance, personal betrayal, and public narrative." Andre nodded approvingly. "Comprehensive. Let's start with financial evidence." Regina joined us via secured video link, her image on the monitor deliberately positioned to prevent anyone entering the room from seeing her face. "The forensic accounting is complete," she reported. "We've identified $2.7 million transferred to shell companies over 14 months. Documentation shows Connor personally authorized every transaction, with Juliet as secondary signatory on 83% of them." "Can the transfers be legitimately explained as business expenses?" Andre asked. "Absolutely not," Regina replied firmly. "I've cross-referenced every transfer with operational activities. None correspond to actual business needs. Moreover, I've traced the money flow from these shell companies to personal accounts in the Caymans and property purchases in California." "The Malibu house," I murmured, remembering Juliet's email about finding the perfect beachfront property. "Precisely," Regina confirmed. "A $4.2 million property purchased through a holding company that traces back to the Cayman account. Down payment, made 3 months ago." Andre made notes on his legal pad. "This is exceptionally clean work, Ms. Montgomery. The SEC will find this compelling." "Speaking of which," I interjected, "Yasmin has confirmed the SEC is prepared to move forward based on our evidence. They can have agents ready on the night of the anniversary party, but they'll need final confirmation 48 hours in advance." "Excellent," Andre replied. "Now, corporate governance. You control 52% of shares, but Connor believes he maintains operational control through board allies, correct?" I nodded. "He's cultivated 3 board members, Whitman, Peterson, and Landry. They've historically voted with him on every initiative." "Have you spoken with them?" "Not directly. That would alert Connor that something's amiss. But I've arranged individual meetings with each in the week before the anniversary celebration, ostensibly to discuss the design retrospective I'm preparing." Andre frowned slightly. "That's cutting it close." "Necessarily so," I countered. "These are businessmen first and foremost. They'll align with whoever controls the company's future. I need to show them definitive evidence of Connor's misconduct, then present a clear succession plan that preserves the company's value and reputation. And if they remain loyal to Connor?" "They won't," I said with quiet certainty. "Not when they see that the alternative is a public scandal that would devastate stock prices and potentially implicate them in governance failures. Besides, I've been cultivating relationships with them for years. They respect me more than Connor realizes." Andre seemed satisfied with this reasoning and moved to the next item. "Personal betrayal. The affair with Juliet Kaplan. What evidence do we have?" "Beyond the emails?" "Hotel receipts, photographs from the private investigator I hired, and testimony from their driver, who's willing to confirm he regularly transported them to a penthouse apartment Connor maintains under a shell company name." "Why would the driver testify against Connor?" "Because Connor humiliated him at last year's holiday party, mocking his accent in front of the entire staff. Small cruelties have consequences." I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Connor's habit of dismissing those he considers beneath him has created more allies for me than he could possibly imagine. Andre nodded thoughtfully. "That brings us to public narrative. What's your strategy for controlling how this story unfolds?" This was perhaps the most crucial element of my plan. Connor had built his success on image, on the carefully crafted persona of the visionary jewelry mogul. Dismantling that image would be as devastating to him as any legal consequence. "I've prepared 3 distinct narratives for different audiences," I explained. "For the board and major investors, a focused presentation on financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. For employees and industry partners, an emphasis on Connor's betrayal of company values and my commitment to stability. For the general, public, and press, a compelling story of creative theft and personal redemption. And how will these narratives be disseminated? I've established relationships with key fashion and business journalists over the past 6 months. Not pitching stories, just building connections. When this breaks, they'll receive exclusive background briefings from sources close to the situation. The timing is critical, Andre emphasized. Everything must happen in precise sequence. Your revelation at the party, the SEC intervention, the board communication, the press strategy. I pulled out a detailed timeline I'd prepared, breaking down the anniversary evening into 15-minute increments. Connor plans to make his announcement during the champagne toast at 8:30. Based on his emails with Juliet, he intends to announce our separation and her new role as creative director simultaneously. Bold, Andre remarked. Predictable, I corrected. Connor has always had a flair for dramatic gestures. What he doesn't know is that at 8:32, while he's still speaking, all screens in the ballroom will display evidence of his affair and financial misconduct. At 8:35, you'll enter with the divorce papers. At 8:40, Yasmin and her team will arrive with the SEC warrants. Regina's voice came through the speaker. And the board members? They'll receive comprehensive digital packets at 8:25, giving them 5 minutes to review before Connor's announcement. By the time he finishes speaking, they'll have enough information to understand which side of history they want to be on. Andre reviewed the timeline, making occasional notations. This leaves very little margin for error or unexpected developments, which is why we need contingency plans for every scenario, I acknowledged. If Connor changes the timing, if the AV system fails, if board members don't receive the packets, if the SEC is delayed. For the next 2 hours, we methodically developed backup plans for each potential complication. By the time we finished, the comprehensive strategy filled a secure digital folder and several physical binders. There's one element we haven't addressed, Andre said as we concluded. The emotional impact. This is not just a business maneuver, Kate. This is the public dissolution of your marriage amid accusations of fraud and betrayal. Are you prepared for that aspect? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on logistics and strategy that I'd compartmentalized the personal devastation almost completely. I've had 18 months to mourn my marriage, I said after a moment. The day I found those emails, I began grieving what I thought we had. What remains now is ensuring that the company I built survives, that the people who depend on it for their livelihoods are protected, and that Connor faces consequences for his actions. Andre studied me with something between concern and admiration. Just remember that when this is over, when the strategies have been executed and the legal battles fought, you'll need to focus on rebuilding, not just the company, but yourself. Nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. One step at a time. First, we execute the plan. As I gathered my documents, I felt a curious lightness. After months of duplicity and preparation, the path forward was clear, the strategy comprehensive. In just a few weeks, everything would change, not just for Connor and me, but for everyone connected to Wright and Taylor. What Connor had intended as my professional execution would instead become his reckoning, and I would finally step out of the shadow he had cast over my achievements and into the light of my own making. 2 weeks before our anniversary celebration, I experienced a moment of what felt like triumph. The pieces of my plan had fallen perfectly into place. Regina had compiled irrefutable evidence of financial misconduct, Andre had prepared all legal documents, and Yasmin had confirmed the SEC's readiness to act. Most satisfying of all, I'd discovered the custom engagement ring Connor had commissioned for Juliet. The revelation came during a routine design review. Darren Phillips, our master jeweler, approached me with a technical question about a setting. Technique? For the Taylor Special Commission, he clarified. referencing our internal code for Connor's personal projects. The emerald-cut diamond with pavé surround. "Show me the design," I requested, maintaining casual interest despite my racing pulse. Darren pulled up the renderings on his tablet, a stunning 3-carat center stone in an architectural setting that incorporated Wright & Taylor's signature detailing. The design notes specified completion priority and a delivery date 3 days before our anniversary. "Beautiful work," I commented, scrolling through the specifications. "The dimensions are precise. Who provided the finger measurements?" "Mr. Taylor brought them in personally," Darren replied. "Very specific about the sizing. Said it needed to be perfect." I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. "It certainly will be. I'd like to oversee the final inspection personally." "Of course, Mrs. Taylor. We expect to complete it next Wednesday." That evening, I added this discovery to my evidence file, a strange satisfaction settling over me. Not only would I expose Connor's betrayal at our anniversary party, but I would do so with intimate knowledge of the very ring he planned to present to Juliet. The symmetry seemed almost poetic. The next morning, however, my carefully constructed plans faced their first serious threat. "Kate, do you have a minute?" Connor appeared in the doorway of my office, his expression uncharacteristically tense. "Of course." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, instantly alert to the deviation from routine. Connor rarely sought me out during business hours, preferring to summon me to his more impressive corner office when necessary. He closed the door behind him, another unusual behavior, and remained standing. "I received an interesting call this morning," he began, studying my face with an intensity that sent warning signals racing through me. "From Thomas Landry." I kept my expression neutral, though my mind rapidly assessed implications. Landry was one of Connor's strongest board allies, the man whose support he was counting on for my removal. "Oh? What did Thomas want?" "He mentioned that you've requested a private meeting with him next week. Something about a design retrospective?" Connor's tone was light, but his eyes remained fixed on mine, searching for tells. "That's right," I confirmed smoothly. "For the anniversary celebration, I thought it would be nice to showcase the evolution of our designs over the past decade. Thomas has been with us from the beginning. His perspective would be valuable." Connor nodded slowly, seeming to accept this explanation. "Interesting that you're also meeting with Peterson and Whitman, separately." My pulse quickened, but I maintained my composure. "Different perspectives for a comprehensive overview. Is there a problem?" "No problem." Connor smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Just curious why my wife is suddenly scheduling private meetings with board members without mentioning it to me." The implication hung between us, a subtle accusation, a hint of suspicion. "I didn't think you'd be interested in the retrospective details," I replied, injecting a note of surprise into my voice. "You've always preferred to focus on future collections rather than historical reviews." Connor studied me for another moment, then his posture relaxed slightly. "Fair enough. Just keep me in the loop about board communications going forward. Consistency in messaging is important." "Of course," I agreed readily. "It's your vision we're celebrating after all." This seemed to satisfy him. With a nod, he turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. I'll need you to reschedule those meetings. We have a potential investor flying in from Dubai. I'd like you to handle the hospitality arrangements while I manage the business discussions." The calculated move was immediately clear. Connor was attempting to prevent my private meetings with board members while framing it as a routine business necessity. "I'll see what can be arranged," I said noncommittally. "When is the investor arriving?" "Next Wednesday through Friday. Block your calendar completely." After Connor left, I sat motionless, evaluating this development. Somehow Connor had become suspicious enough to monitor my meeting schedule and intervene. Whether he actually suspected my true intentions or was simply being cautious ahead of his own plans was unclear. Either way, I needed to adapt quickly. I messaged Regina through our secure channel. Plan B for board communications. Connor blocking. Scheduled meetings. Her response came within minutes. Digital packets prepped. Can distribute securely without in-person meetings if necessary. Next, I called Andre from a burner phone I'd purchased specifically for contingencies. We have a complication, I explained after briefly outlining Connor's intervention. He's actively preventing my board meetings. This suggests heightened awareness on his part, Andre observed. Has anything else changed in his behavior? I considered the question carefully. He's been more attentive lately, asking about my schedule, checking in throughout the day. I attributed it to anniversary preparations, but in retrospect, he may suspect something, Andre concluded. Not necessarily your specific plan, but perhaps that you're not as oblivious as he believed. Options? 2 approaches. Accelerate or misdirect. We could move up our timeline, presenting evidence to the board before Connor makes his move. Or we create a convincing distraction that explains your activities while maintaining the original plan. I weighed the alternatives, considering potential consequences. Accelerating risked acting without complete preparation. Misdirection required a convincing performance when Connor was already watching closely. Misdirection, I decided. I need to give Connor a plausible explanation for my meetings and recent activities. By that afternoon, I had implemented a multi-layered response. First, I sent Connor a comprehensive proposal for the design retrospective, complete with historical photos, timeline drafts, and mock-up displays, evidence of the project's legitimacy. Then I scheduled an appointment with our company's PR firm ostensibly to discuss the presentation, ensuring Connor would see it on my calendar. Most crucially, I arranged for our Paris office to discover a potential counterfeiting operation targeting our signature collection. This would necessitate confidential discussions with board members about intellectual property protection, a perfect cover for the meetings Connor had attempted to block. That evening, I briefed Connor on the counterfeiting situation, presenting it as an unfortunate but manageable issue that required board awareness. I'll handle the Dubai investor hospitality as you requested, I assured him, but we need to maintain these board meetings. The legal team advises board disclosure of the potential brand infringement before our quarterly filing. Connor frowned, clearly displeased but unable to argue against proper governance procedures without revealing his true concerns. Fine, but keep the discussions focused on the counterfeiting issue. The board doesn't need distractions before the anniversary announcements. Of course, I agreed, hiding my relief behind a mask of professional concern. Everything will proceed, as it should. Later that night, alone in my study while Connor attended a business dinner with Juliet, I reflected on the day's developments. The close call had been unsettling, but ultimately instructive. Connor was watching more carefully than I'd anticipated, which meant I needed to be even more meticulous in my preparations. The false victory of discovering the ring had nearly led to complacency. This complication had sharpened my focus, reminding me that until the evidence was presented and consequences delivered, nothing was certain. I messaged Andre one final update before securing my devices for the night. Counterfeit story in place. Board meetings proceeding as scheduled. Connor suspects something, but not the truth. Proceeding with heightened caution. His response was brief, but reassuring. Adaptation is strength. Contingencies holding. 13 days to execution. 13 days until Connor's carefully orchestrated plans collapsed around him. 13 days until I reclaimed my company and my narrative. The path had become more complicated, but the destination remained clear. The encounter with Connor, his suspicion, his attempt to block my meetings, crystallized something within me. What had begun as self-preservation 18 months ago had evolved into something more profound, a reclamation of my identity, my company, and my future. 1 week before our anniversary celebration, I stood alone in our flagship store after closing hours. Display cases gleamed under carefully calibrated lighting, each piece telling a story of craftsmanship and vision. My craftsmanship, my vision, though the world recognized only Connor's name. I moved to the center display where the Legacy Collection resided, architectural pieces inspired by Art Deco landmarks, the designs that had launched Wright and Taylor's rise from boutique jeweler to luxury brand. My original sketches for these pieces remained in notebooks Connor had never bothered to examine, dated proof of creation he had claimed as his own. "Mrs. Taylor?" Andrei Petrova's voice pulled me from contemplation. Our master craftsman had stayed late to complete special orders, his weathered hands bearing the calluses of 40 years at the jeweler's bench. "Just reviewing the collection before the celebration," I explained, gesturing to the display cases. Andrei nodded understanding. "These pieces still sell better than anything else we create. Your designs have remarkable longevity." The simple acknowledgement, so rarely offered in the company Connor controlled, touched me unexpectedly. "The special commission is complete," Andrei continued, producing a small box from his pocket. "Perfect to specifications." I opened the velvet case to reveal the ring Connor had ordered for Juliet, the emerald-cut diamond in its elaborate setting, gleaming under the showroom lights. The craftsmanship was impeccable, the design elegant yet distinctive. Despite everything, I appreciated its beauty. "Your work is exquisite as always, Andrei. The design had your influence," he observed quietly. "Even when he tries to create something without you, your aesthetic remains." I studied the ring more closely, recognizing elements that echoed my earlier collections. Even in this, a token of his betrayal, Connor had borrowed from my creative vision. "Will you deliver it to Mr. Taylor's office as usual?" Andrei asked. "No," I decided, closing the box with a decisive click. "I'll handle this personally." That evening, the ring secured in my home safe, I made a pivotal decision. No more defensive moves, no more reacting to Connor's machinations. The time had come to accelerate certain elements of my plan. I contacted Regina first. "We need to move up the financial documentation transfer to the SEC. Connor's growing suspicious." "The files are ready," she confirmed, "but rushing this increases risk of detection." "A calculated risk we need to take," I countered. "Better to move while we still control the narrative." Next, I called Andre Baxter, outlining my concerns and adjusted timeline. "If Connor suspects something, he may try to preempt your revelation," Andre warned. "Are you prepared for that possibility?" "I am now," I replied, a new resolve hardening my voice. "I've decided to take additional steps to secure our position." The following morning, I executed the first of these steps. Using my authority as majority shareholder, a fact still unknown to Connor, I initiated security protocol changes for our company's financial systems. Nothing dramatic enough to raise immediate alarms, but sufficient to prevent Connor from making any significant fund transfers without secondary authorization. When Connor called to question the notification he'd received about system updates, I dismissed it as routine IT maintenance. "The security team mentioned something about that," I said vaguely. "Probably just standard quarterly protocols." He seemed to accept this explanation, but his lingering silence suggested continued suspicion. My second action was more personal. I removed my most important possessions from our shared home: family heirlooms, irreplaceable photographs, crucial documents, and secured them in a location Connor knew nothing about. The possibility that he might retaliate once exposed had always existed, but now it seemed increasingly likely. The third step involved our staff. Without revealing specifics, I scheduled one-on-one conversations with key personnel, designers, craftspeople, administrators whose loyalty would be essential in the aftermath of Connor's exposure. I discussed their contributions, future opportunities, concerns about their roles. These conversations served multiple purposes: strengthening relationships that would sustain the company through the coming transition, while identifying which team members might remain aligned with Connor. 4 days before the anniversary celebration, I received confirmation that the SEC had officially opened an investigation based on the documentation we'd provided. The timing was perfect. The inquiry remained confidential for now, but could be revealed at the precise moment of maximum impact. That night, as Connor and I dined with clients, maintaining the facade of the perfect couple, I felt an almost transcendent clarity. The stakes had escalated, the risks had multiplied, but my commitment had deepened beyond any uncertainty. When Connor raised his glass in a toast to partnerships that endure, I met his gaze steadily and smiled, my own silent toast, echoing in my mind, to truth that prevails, to justice long deferred, to the reckoning that awaits us both. In 4 days, everything would change, and I was finally completely ready. The final dress rehearsal, Regina murmured as we reviewed the timeline once more. We sat in the secure conference room at Andre's office, surrounded by documents and digital displays tracking every element of tomorrow's plan. 24 hours before the anniversary celebration, our preparation had reached its culmination. The methodical accumulation of evidence, allies, and contingencies now lay before us in meticulously organized portfolios. "Walk me through the technical sequence again," I requested, needing absolute certainty that the most vulnerable aspects of the plan were secure. Regina nodded and pulled up the digital workflow on her tablet. At 8:28, 2 minutes before Connor's scheduled toast, I'll activate the AV override from this secure tablet. All screens in the ballroom will appear normal until I enter this authorization code. She indicated a complex alphanumeric sequence. At 8:32, precisely when Connor begins his announcement about your separation, the screens will switch to the evidence presentation. And if the primary system fails, backup protocol activates automatically. If both systems fail, we have hard copies of key documents positioned with 3 trusted staff members who will distribute them on Signal. I nodded, satisfied with the redundancies. The board packets? Digital delivery at 8:25 to their secure company emails. Physical copies will be hand-delivered by couriers who will arrive at 8:20 and wait for my signal. Each board member will receive identical information regardless of delivery method. Andre joined us, setting a leather portfolio on the table. SEC and legal timing confirmed. Agent Thompson and her team will be in position at 8:35. I'll enter with the divorce filing at 8:33, immediately following the screen display but before Connor can regain control of the room. The precision of the timeline was crucial. Connor's humiliation needed to be public and complete, not out of vindictiveness, but because anything less would allow him room to manipulate the narrative afterward. "And the ring?" Regina asked quietly. I touched the small velvet box in my jacket pocket. "I'll have it with me. When Connor kneels to propose to Juliet, I'll be ready." We reviewed contingency plans for another hour, addressing potential complications, from weather delays to technology failures to Connor changing the event sequence. For each scenario, we had multiple response options, all leading to the same ultimate outcome. "There's one variable we can't fully control," Andre noted as we concluded. Connor's reaction when cornered. "Men like him, narcissistic, entitled, can become unpredictable when their self-image is threatened." "I've considered that," I acknowledged. "Security will be present throughout the venue. I've also prepared the staff to expect an announcement that may cause disruption. They'll be ready to manage the situation discreetly." What I didn't say aloud was that I'd spent 10 years studying Connor's reactions, cataloging his responses to stress and challenge. I could predict with reasonable accuracy how he would move through denial, anger, bargaining, and ultimately, desperate self-preservation. His patterns were familiar to me in ways he had never bothered to study mine. As our meeting concluded, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anxiety that had accompanied me through months of planning had dissipated, replaced by quiet resolve. "Get some rest," Andre advised as we gathered our materials. Tomorrow will be demanding both practically and emotionally. I nodded, though I doubted sleep would come easily. Everything's in motion now. Back at home, I found Connor in his study, reviewing notes for his anniversary speech. The irony wasn't lost on me, him rehearsing the words that would supposedly end our marriage, while I prepared for the revelation that would actually do so. "Working late?" I asked from the doorway, maintaining the performance that had become second nature. He looked up, his smile confident, untroubled by the faintest premonition of what awaited him. "Just finalizing some thoughts for tomorrow. The anniversary speech needs to be memorable." "I'm sure it will be," I agreed, the understatement almost making me smile despite everything. "How's the retrospective coming along?" he asked, the question casual yet pointed, still probing for inconsistencies in my cover story. "Completed this afternoon. The timeline display looks beautiful." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, then returned to his notes. "Good. Tomorrow's about looking forward, not back, but acknowledging our history sets the stage nicely." Later, as I lay beside Connor for the final night of our marriage, listening to his even breathing, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From the graduate student who had believed in his vision to the woman who had reclaimed her own, from the wife who accepted erasure to the executive prepared to take control. Tomorrow, Connor Taylor would finally see the woman he had underestimated for a decade. Not as he had imagined her, desperate, confused, publicly humiliated, but as she truly was, strategic, resilient, and finally stepping into the light of her own making. I closed my eyes, mentally reviewing each step of the plan one last time, every detail in place, every contingency considered. The final preparations complete. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of 18 months of patience, planning, and performance. And I was ready. Le Jardin transformed for our anniversary celebration, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over elegant table settings, white roses and silver accents creating a sophisticated tableau. As guests arrived in evening finery, the atmosphere hummed with anticipation for what everyone assumed would be a celebration of business success and marital longevity. If only they knew. I circulated among our guests with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about the decade that had built Wright & Taylor into an industry leader. Connor worked the other side of the room, Juliet never far from his orbit though maintaining professional distance for appearance's sake. "You look radiant," whispered Yasmin Thompson, approaching with champagne in hand, her SEC credentials concealed, beneath an evening gown. Only I knew she wasn't merely a guest. "Everything in position?" I murmured behind a smile. "Teams on standby. Warrant secured." She clinked her glass against mine in subtle confirmation. Across the room, I caught Regina's eye, a nearly imperceptible nod conveying that technical systems were functional. Andre Baxter had arrived, positioning himself discreetly near the entrance, legal documents secure in his attaché case. At 8:15, waitstaff began distributing champagne for the upcoming toast. Board members received their secure digital packets, expressions flickering with confusion as they glanced at their phones, then at each other, then at me. I maintained my serene smile, revealing nothing. Connor approached the center of the room at precisely 8:30, tapping his glass for attention. The crowd quieted, turning expectantly toward the man they believed was the visionary behind Wright & Taylor's success. "Friends, colleagues, honored guests," Connor began, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity that had once charmed me. 10 years ago, Wright & Taylor embarked on an extraordinary journey. I watched him command the room, knowing each word leading toward my intended humiliation. The anticipation should have been unbearable, yet I felt strangely peaceful, centered in the knowledge that controlled chaos would soon erupt. "This past decade has brought remarkable achievements," Connor continued, "built on creativity, perseverance, and bold vision. Beside me, Regina activated her tablet discreetly. The screens around the ballroom remained normal, displaying tasteful anniversary graphics as Connor spoke. But beneath that placid surface, digital evidence waited like a coiled spring. "Tonight marks not just a celebration of the past," Connor announced, his gaze sweeping the room before settling momentarily on Juliet, "but an exciting new chapter for Wright and Taylor." He moved to the center of the room, champagne flute raised. "Hiao. To 10 incredible years," he declared, "and to new beginnings." The guests raised their glasses in response, unaware of the seismic shift about to occur. Connor set down his champagne, reaching into his jacket pocket to extract a small velvet box, identical to the one in my own pocket. As he moved toward Juliet with unmistakable intent, I stepped forward, perfectly timed. Around us, the screens flickered nearly imperceptibly as Regina entered the final authorization code. Connor lowered himself to one knee before Juliet, whose expression mingled triumph with carefully manufactured surprise. He opened the ring box with theatrical flourish. "Juliet Kaplan," he began, "would you do me the honor—" "Funny you'd choose that ring, Connor," I interrupted, my voice clear and steady. "The custom 3-carat emerald cut with pavé diamonds." The confrontation had begun. "Funny you'd choose that." "Ring, Connor," I continued, stepping forward as confusion flickered across his face. "The custom 3-carat emerald cut with pavé diamonds." I turned to face our stunned guests. "He ordered it from Wright and Taylor Jewelers 3 weeks ago. Perhaps he forgot that I became majority owner last year." Around the room, screens flickered to life, displaying documentation of Connor's affair with Juliet, hotel receipts, photographs, email exchanges planning their future together. Gasps rippled through the crowd as comprehension dawned. Connor rose slowly from his kneeling position, his expression transforming from confusion to shock to fury in rapid succession. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled rage. I lifted my own glass. "And those private emails planning your new life together? They're currently being projected onto every screen in this ballroom." Guests reached for their phones as notifications chimed throughout the room. The digital evidence packets Regina had just distributed to every attendee. Connor's face drained of color as he realized the extent of the exposure. "You had no right," he stammered, looking frantically between the screens and the horrified faces surrounding us. "Those are private communications, much like the company financial records you've been falsifying?" I inquired calmly. "Or the offshore accounts you've been funneling Wright and Taylor funds into?" The screens shifted to display financial documentation, transfers, shell companies, the Malibu property purchased with company funds. Connor lunged toward me, but was intercepted by our head of security, who had been briefed to expect emotional reactions to the evening's revelations. "Kate, you don't understand," Connor attempted, his voice shifting to the condescending tone I knew so well. "These figures are complex business arrangements that you've misinterpreted." The doors opened, and Andre entered. Legal documents in hand. "Mrs. Taylor understands perfectly," he announced, approaching us, "as do the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office." Juliet began backing away from Connor, her survival instincts evidently overriding any loyalty. "Connor, you told me those accounts were legitimate," she protested loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You said everything was properly structured." Connor's expression hardened as he recognized this betrayal. "Don't pretend you weren't involved," he snapped. "Your signature is on half those transfers." I removed the velvet box from my pocket, identical to the one Connor had presented moments before. "By the way," I said, opening it to reveal the ring. Inside, "Did you know I personally authorized this design when our head jeweler sought approval? I even expedited the process knowing how special it was." Yasmin Thompson approached, flanked by 2 agents who had entered behind Andre. "Connor Taylor," she stated formally, "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire, fraud, and embezzlement." As the agents moved toward Connor, his desperate gaze landed on board members standing nearby. "This is ridiculous. A misunderstanding," he appealed. "Thomas, Richard, you know me. We've worked together for years." Thomas. Landry shook his head slowly. "We've reviewed the evidence, Connor. You betrayed the company. You betrayed all of us." While agents read Connor his rights, I addressed our stunned guests with composed dignity. "I apologize for this unfortunate spectacle. Wright and Taylor will continue operations uninterrupted under my leadership as majority shareholder and CEO. Thank you for your understanding during this transition." As Connor was escorted from the room, his final glare contained one unmistakable question. How? The answer was simple. He had taught me well the power of presentation, of controlling the narrative. He had just never imagined I would apply those lessons against him. After Connor was escorted from the ballroom, a stunned silence descended over the remaining guests. The elegant anniversary celebration had transformed into something unrecognizable. Champagne glasses abandoned, conversations suspended mid-sentence, faces registering shock, confusion, and in some cases, a certain vindicated satisfaction. Regina appeared at my side, tablet still in hand. "Systems secure," she murmured. "All evidence successfully distributed and backed up." I nodded my thanks, then addressed the room with deliberate composure. "Please, everyone, take a moment to collect yourselves. Refreshments will continue to be served. Those who wish to depart, our staff will assist with retrieving your belongings." Several guests moved immediately toward the exits, among them Connor's. Longtime friends and associates suddenly eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Others remained frozen in place, processing the dramatic shift in dynamics they had just witnessed. Juliet stood alone, abandoned mid-proposal, her expression cycling between humiliation and calculation. When our eyes met across the room, I saw something I hadn't anticipated: relief. Had she, too, felt trapped in Connor's manipulations? That was a complexity to consider another day. "Remarkable control," observed Andre, approaching with a glass of water. "How are you holding up?" "Ask me tomorrow," I replied, accepting the water gratefully. "Right now, I need to manage this transition." The board members converged around me, their expressions a mixture of concern and newfound respect. "We should discuss immediate steps," Thomas Landry suggested, his earlier loyalty to Connor evidently recalibrated in the face of overwhelming evidence. "The company will need steady leadership through this crisis." "My office, 15 minutes," I agreed. "I have a transition plan prepared." As the crowd thinned, I moved through the room with purposeful calm, thanking guests for their understanding, reassuring key clients about business continuity, and acknowledging staff members who had played roles in the evening's revelation. Yasmin returned briefly, her professional demeanor restored now that her SEC role was public. "Connor's being processed," she informed me quietly. "The official investigation will begin immediately. You should expect to provide formal statements tomorrow. I'll be ready," I assured her. "Thank you for your discretion throughout this process." When most guests had departed, I found myself standing alone at the center of the ballroom. The screens had returned to displaying innocuous anniversary graphics, as if the exposé of betrayal and fraud had never occurred. The dissonance between the elegant surroundings and the emotional devastation of the past hour was jarring. My phone buzzed with messages from press contacts already seeking comments on Connor's arrest. Social media would soon be ablaze with speculation. By morning, what had transpired in this private gathering would become public knowledge, the narrative expanding beyond my control despite careful planning. For the first time since discovering Connor's betrayal 18 months ago, I allowed myself a moment of genuine emotion. Not regret or satisfaction, but something more complex. A bittersweet acknowledgement of endings and beginnings, of justice served and partnerships destroyed. The weight of the velvet ring box remained in my pocket, a tangible reminder of all that had been lost and all that had been reclaimed. I removed it one last time, studying the gleaming diamond that had been intended as a symbol of Connor's betrayal. Perhaps one day it would be redesigned, transformed into something new, much like Wright and Taylor itself, and much like the woman, who now stood finally and fully at its helm. 6 months after the anniversary party that ended my marriage and transformed Wright and Taylor Jewelers, I stood at the podium during the International Jewelry Design Awards in Geneva. The audience of industry leaders, designers, and press watched attentively as I accepted the Innovation in Leadership Award, the first ever given to recognize ethical business practices alongside creative excellence. This recognition belongs to the entire Wright and Taylor team, I acknowledged, my voice steady and confident in a way that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Their resilience through transition reflects the true strength of our company. The company had not just survived Connor's removal, it had flourished. Our stock had initially plummeted when news broke of his arrest, but rebounded dramatically when my leadership strategy and 5-year vision were announced. The financial stability I had quietly built over years provided a foundation that investors recognized and valued. After the ceremony, Yasmin Thompson approached, no longer in her SEC capacity, but as a professional colleague. "Quite a transformation," she observed, "both for the company and for you." She was right. The woman who accepted congratulations with easy authority bore little resemblance to the diminished wife who had once stood in Connor's shadow. I had stepped fully into my role as CEO and lead designer, no longer allowing my contributions to be minimized or erased. "The trial begins next month," Yasmin noted. "Are you prepared to testify?" "As prepared as possible," I acknowledged. Connor had rejected all plea deals, insisting on his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Juliet, by contrast, had cooperated immediately, pleading guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony against him. Back in my hotel suite, I reviewed the latest collection designs, the first created entirely under my official direction. The pieces incorporated architectural elements that had always been my signature, now explicitly acknowledged in marketing materials and press releases. Regina had been promoted to CFO, her financial acumen finally recognized with appropriate title and compensation. Andre Petrova now led our artisan training program, passing generations of craftsmanship knowledge to new jewelers. The company culture had transformed along with its leadership, emphasizing collaboration and recognition rather than individual genius mythology. The true measure of my transformation became clear when a prestigious business magazine requested an interview about rebuilding after betrayal. I declined, offering instead to discuss our innovative apprenticeship program and sustainability initiatives. "But readers want to hear about Connor Taylor's downfall," the editor pressed. "The scandal is what sells." "That's his story," I replied, firmly. "I'm focused on Wright and Taylor's future. My identity was no longer defined by Connor's betrayal or by my response to it. I had reclaimed not just my company, but myself, my vision, my voice, my value independent of him or our shared history. The emerald ring that Connor had intended for Juliet had been dismantled, its stones incorporated into a special collection benefiting women's entrepreneurship programs. From symbol of betrayal to seed of opportunity, a transformation that mirrored my own journey from shadow to substance, from overlooked to acknowledged, from silent partner to recognized leader. The woman who had once been introduced as Connor, Taylor's wife, now stood firmly as Kate Wright, defined entirely by her own achievements. If you're drawn to my story, it's probably not because of the jewelry or the corporate intrigue. It's because you felt it too. That slow erosion of self that happens when someone convinces you that your contributions are secondary, your vision derivative, your voice unnecessary. I spent a decade allowing someone else to define my worth. Every design I created, Every strategy I developed, every relationship I built, all became stepping stones for someone else's ambition. I told myself it was strategic partnership, that public recognition didn't matter, that I knew my value even if others didn't. But here's what I learned. When you allow your contributions to be erased, you eventually begin to erase yourself. You speak more softly in meetings. You qualify your ideas with maybe and perhaps. You stop fighting for recognition because the fight itself becomes exhausting. The most important thing I reclaimed wasn't my company or my designs, it was my voice. Not just the ability to speak, but the certainty that what I say matters. The knowledge that my vision deserves to be attributed to me, not absorbed into someone else's narrative. This doesn't mean you need to orchestrate a dramatic takedown at your anniversary party. Most reclamations happen quietly, in small moments, of standing firm. It's correcting someone who misattributes your idea. It's removing qualifiers from your speech. It's documenting your contributions consistently and unapologetically. Today, the Wright and Taylor Mentorship Initiative has helped over 200 women recognize and assert their value in their fields. Our Academy graduates enter the industry with a fundamental understanding that their creativity is their own, to be shared but never surrendered. The question I'm asked most frequently isn't about Connor or the scandal, or even about jewelry design. It's simply, how did you find the courage? My answer is always the same. Courage wasn't something I found in a moment of revelation. It was something I built methodically, evidence by evidence, ally by ally, plan by plan. Just as I designed collections that would stand the test of time, I constructed a foundation of truth that couldn't be shaken. If you see yourself in my story, start building that foundation today. Document your work. Cultivate genuine allies. Trust your perceptions. And remember, reclaiming your narrative isn't selfish or ambitious. It's necessary. Not just for you, but for everyone whose voice deserves to be heard. Your story belongs to you. It's time to sign your own work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.